So you're talking now about the other side of aerobic training, which is CO2 tolerance, which is a very
Yeah,
cool, very deep dive that,
yeah,
I mean, you can try this when we log off, but anyone that's watching this as well, feel free to either pause or do this afterwards. You can go and lay yourself down on a bed and get like a metronome app on your phone and set a tempo of 4 seconds in, or of just like 60 beats per minute at 4 seconds. And you're going to be going donk, 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 donk. You'll breathe in across 4 seconds, and then you'll suspend your breathing at the top of that, like at the apex of that breath for 4 seconds, where you just kind of, you're still trying to breathe in, but you're just letting air trickle in through your nose rather than trying to pull it in. And then you'll sigh and let the air out over 4 seconds. And then at sort of the, you know, the bottom side of that exhale, you just suspend yourself in an exhale state for 4 seconds, where you're not trying to brace or hold your breath. You're just allowing sort of air to trickle out. And you do that over 5 to 10 minutes. And there are phases that you go through where your brain has this moment of panic where it goes, we're not breathing enough. Like, we need more oxygen, which is crazy to think about because you're not in any danger. You're laying on a bed or a couch or the floor, and you're still getting oxygen, but your brain is conditioned to a certain volume of oxygen rather than a certain percentage of oxygen. And so it's looking for the next breath. It's dependent on the next breath. And you can absolutely influence aerobic conditioning variables by getting better at navigating that signal from CO2, because CO2 is our stress molecule. Cortisol is our stress hormone, but CO2 is our stress molecule. And when we get a buildup of CO2 in the system, the brain goes, I need to breathe. And it's the inability to buffer CO2 when we're working, you know, through aerobic or anaerobic exercise that sends that signal for you to breathe more. And you start breathing more, but if you're not better at pulling the percentage of oxygen out of each breath that you need to sustain the effort, you'll hit your ceiling. So you can actually hit this, you can train it 2 ways. You can train it in a session, which is, as you're saying, you can use your heart rate and you can manage your breathing. You can restrict your oxygen flow with your nose. But when we're not training as well and we're recovering, we can use cool little modalities like that metronome and just sitting there and regulating our breathing to a tempo. And we're still training our aerobic system because we're buffering our nervous system's ability to tolerate CO2 within the system. So you're actually learning to utilize more oxygen molecules per breath at the other end of that oxidative phosphorylation system, where we've got the electron transport chain that's producing a whole bunch of carbon. We need to get that carbon out. And luckily, we've got a whole bunch of oxygen just sitting there in the system. So we're learning to access the end ranges of that aerobic cellular respiration and just buffer that carbon. It just binds to oxygen and it goes out the system. So you can train it 2 ways. And the second way, that CO2 tolerance way, is what you're talking about here. Super, super overlooked. And that's where a lot of nose breathing, like conditioning, leads people. They go down this flow state, and eventually the next step is this state of just effortlessness, where they sit there and go, I am responding to everything. Like, nothing scares me, nothing panics me. They're holding their breath for like 2.5 minutes and they're just chilling, and people are sitting there going, who is this human? Like, who is this superhuman? But you're just sitting there going, I've unlocked my aerobic potential. Or I've started to unlock my aerobic potential. It's very cool, very deep rabbit hole that we can go down. And it's definitely a video that I'm doing in the future, but that's definitely something I would encourage you to just like have a step into. Like, just play with that after this, and then message me and let me know how you go. Because man, when you can use it as a auto-regulative tool as well, because when you start to get confident and consistent with your tempos, like for me, I know like a 4-4-4-4 is a good tempo for me, because it's like a baseline. When I haven't recovered from a training session and I'm just doing my 4x4, I struggle. I'm like, man, I'm really, really struggling here. Or if I can't sleep, first thing I do, 4x4s, and I'll like use my heart rate so I don't have to turn my phone on, and I'm just like going by my heartbeat, and I'm panicking after like 30 to 60 seconds of this. And I'm thinking, man, my nervous system is so jacked up because I can't offset all that extra carbon dioxide in the system. So it's cool that you're like, I haven't even spoken to you about this. And then your brain is like, I kind of want to see what would happen if I, took that next step with nose breathing, because that is the natural next step when you use that constraint. It's like, well, how can I use this tool differently? Because the tool doesn't change. It's still a friggin' schnoz, but how can I take it to the next level? So it's rad that you're coming up with that.
Yeah.
And it's
I
definitely
think
something.
it's, and I think like moving forward for the next period of time, just because there's no real events coming up and we don't know when all this is going to end, I think I'm just going to use this next little period to just experiment in like my aerobic training and not have like an aerobic training goal, but have the goal be to,
Train aerobically.
yeah, just train aerobically and manage my breath and respiratory system.
Yeah.
Like,
So rather than physiologically train, it's more like a psychological training block, and then you'll
yeah,
note the physiological responses.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then we can, and because I've got my Garmin wristwatch and my chest strap, which I use for heart rate monitoring,
Yeah. Okay.
um, we can track our physiological changes that way and, see if our times are changing. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse?
Yeah.
Where's my heart rate sitting as opposed to what my pace is whilst I'm running and all that kind of stuff. So,
Does
yeah,
your
it'll be interesting to track.
do you have a wind trainer, or do you just like take the bike on the road?
I have a wind trainer in my room too. So
Does
I'll
your
cycle in my room sometimes.
does your setup have the ability to track wattage, like average wattage, or
Um,
like
my wind
calories, I
trainer
guess?
doesn't. My wind trainer doesn't, but I can get it. My Garmin will track it when I'm on the road. I don't know how accurate it is,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
um, when I'm on the road cycling, my Garmin will track it. Um, I think it's much better suited for running though.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
I wanna get it for the bike, I'll probably buy a separate power meter.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely look into it, because if you can at least set the constraint of time so that it's not a variable. And
Yeah.
then another way would be, is my average wattage over the same session going up as I get better at, you know, um, responding to the CO2 stimulus that's happening within my body.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I like the assault bikes that I have, because I'm able to kind of, like, I could give you the same session of 10 seconds on max effort, 80 seconds of active recovery walking over 15 rounds, which is a bitch of a session. And we might do that twice a week. And then in between that, we're doing 3 to 5 gentle green zone sort of aerobic sessions where the focus is on nose breathing. And theoretically, technically, doing 2 of those yellow zone sort of more anaerobic sessions a week shouldn't give you a significant adaptation where you would sit there and go, wow, you're getting so much better anaerobically. Like, it's just something that we can use to measure the adaptations that are occurring away from that session, because that session is only, you know, it's like 15 to 18 minutes worth of work. It's hard work, but 15 to 18 minutes or 30 to 36 minutes a week shouldn't be enough to give you a significant adaptation or like a noticeable adaptation. It will give you something, but the gentle aerobic stuff is where the magic really happens, because you start to buffer that recovery ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
and you can take the same session, 10 seconds on, 80 seconds off over 15 rounds, and then go and record calories and go, you put more power out today. Last time we did this, you gave me 60 calories across the whole session. Excuse me, this week you gave me 75. Like, that's quantifiably an adaptation, like a positive adaptation. So
Mm-hmm.
there's cool ways that you can use, wattage, I guess, if you're wanting to dive into that a little more, because it's hard to say, like, you'll feel the difference, but it's hard to say, oh yeah, I'm crushing all of my fitness stuff at the moment because of my nose breathing. You just know it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
when you're in the middle of a run, you'd be like, I'm normally grinding here, but I feel really good. Like, I'm in that flow state, and it's just easier
Yeah.
to tap into.
100%, 100%.
Mm.
And the biggest thing I knew or found as well from a control standpoint was because with running, this is more running specific, but I was at the start, as I was struggling to like really adjust to it. But once I got into it and I was really comfortable just doing aerobic work, breathing through my nose, then I didn't really do a lot of high intensity interval running. Probably after the first, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, I think.
Yep.
There was probably a good 8 or 9 week period where I didn't do a lot of high intensity running, just because I was focusing on the bike and I was starting to ease back into swimming. And the joint stress I was getting from running was starting to play with my foot a little bit.
Yeah.
So once I'd overcome that and I was just feeding back some high intensity interval running into my programming, I was like, all right, I'm nasal breathing aerobically very comfortably. Let's see where I can push my heart rate to and still nose breathe.
That's
And I
the,
think
yeah, the natural progression.
yeah, I was pushing. So I think I was doing 2 minutes on, 1 minute off on a run. So when I say off, I was letting my heart rate come back down to, I think it was about 113 over, or between 113 to 122. That was
Sure.
my window that I was aiming
Yep.
for. So it wasn't completely off. It was still a little bit of work. But when I was actually running,
were
I
you
wanted
just running slow?
It started off to be a walk until I got into that zone, and then I
Yep.
was just running at a speed to maintain.
Sure.
Then for the work portion, I wanted to really push it up to probably 168 roughly. That was my goal, between 154 and 168.
Yep.
And so I managed to, in those 2 minute intervals, I was the most I hit was 165, but the whole time I was just nasal breathing as if I was running aerobically, and it was crazy. And as we went on, it would have been interesting to see if I was able to maintain that for, say, like a 15-minute tempo run where I am working quite hard for 15 minutes, but still nasal breathing that entire time. So it would have been interesting to see how far I could push the needle. But yeah, like a 165 heart rate for me is not. Sorry. A 165 heart rate for me is not like cruising. Like that's pushing the needle.
Yeah, it's
pretty
nudging
hard.
red.
Yeah, like I'm probably working at 87% max heart rate roughly.
Yep.
So to nasal breathe, the way I felt nasal breathing for that was like I was quite blown away by it. I was like, am I actually like working here, or is this just like what I'm doing? Like it was.
There's some really cool physiological implications that you can pick out of that, in that, you know, what we were just talking about, how your ability to buffer CO2 means that you're breathing more carbon dioxide out, which means you're binding more carbon to oxygen molecules, which means that you're getting more, like a greater percent of oxygen per breath, not necessarily breathing more oxygen, which means that your VO2 max is 100% increasing, but not because your ability to tolerate volume of oxygen is going up. It's because your ability to buffer carbon out the other end of that, OP cycle is going up. And that's a huge benefit that is often overlooked with like VO2 max as a test. It's a great test, but if you're testing for the wrong thing, then you're going to miss some really critical things. But, you know, and then we talk about you running at 85 to 87% of your max heart rate and breathing through a device that is designed to restrict oxygen because you're trying to keep the nervous system at a specific level of arousal. And you're doing that at a level of output that is quantifiably matched with a level of intensity of close to 87% max. So there's so many cool variables that you can take and then imply or infer certain things around your own physiology. And it can't be questioned because it's based on how you feel as well, which, as you said, you felt great. And I know when I'm in that flow zone, like I'll outrun a tiger because the tiger's going to get tired before I do. And it feels awesome. But you can't, you can't quantify that feeling with somebody when you try to explain to them the flow state, because they may not have achieved that state. And if they have, then you might not know it because they might not be able to explain it. It's a very cool thing to play with for sure. And I friggin' love it. I love all my CO2 work, and it's one of the lowest hanging fruits that you can pick, because it's training without training. It's effortless training. It's insane how little effort it requires to develop a strong aerobic foundation. Insane. Insane.
Yeah.
I also want to, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's definitely something I'm going to dive more into this next little period of time and just see what we can do with it.
Let's do it together.
Let's do it.
I got nothing on for 6 weeks. And I'm getting a little pudgy, man. I went to the cheesecake shop yesterday and they said, oh, oh no, when did I go? What's today? Thursday. I went on Monday and I said, and they said, oh, it's like 2 for 1. So I bought 3 and she goes, if you buy one more, you'll get 4 for 2. I said, I know. I'm purposefully buying 3 because I don't want to have that 4th. And it's Thursday and I've got, they were quarter cheesecakes. Let's put it into context, but it's still, I've only got like that much left of one of the quarters because I just inhale it because I'm sitting here like, I'm just used to ingesting calories and my output has been so low lately that I'm just like, oh man, I'm getting sloppy. So then I jumped on the bike this morning to record this aerobic video, and like I wasn't nudging it, but I just like at the end of it when I finished recording, I realized that my level of arousal was a little higher than it should have been because I was recording the video, but my my ego was there sort of saying, hey man, you're fine. And then as soon as I said stop recording, I went, fuck, that was heavy. It shouldn't have been heavy. It should have just been a green zone. It was very, very funny. I might have to go and reshoot it.
Yeah.
Shocking. But that leads us really beautifully into the last little thing I wanted to talk about, which was, the nutritional aspect of it where, you said to me you were ingesting, between 4,000 and 5,000 calories a day, and a big portion of that was carbohydrates. How did you feel increasing that threshold of carbohydrates and increasing that quantity of food? Obviously, there's outputs that need to be reflected in their input, but I'd be interested to know how your body tolerated that extra input of carbohydrates and some things that you learned from manipulating your own nutrition throughout that cycle.
Yeah. So I think like nutrition is definitely not my forte, but I think I've read enough into it to understand like why I'm doing what I'm doing at the same time. So like I've always found myself to be someone who naturally gravitates towards more of a carbohydrate based than say like a fat based diet for my energy requirements. And then protein, I just tend to keep quite constant because I found like a nice healthy balance where I feel good on a certain amount of protein, or a certain range of it anyway. So I've like leading into it, I was like, okay, I used some calculations. So one of my key resources was Alex Viada, he wrote a book called The Hybrid Athlete. And he talks a lot about people who are into like strength training or bodybuilding or strongman, whatever it is, who want to pursue aerobic endeavors as well. Because typically both of them are on opposite ends of the spectrum, it seemed to be. So he wrote a book discussing how to implement training for both and trying to optimize adaptation to both pursuits. And one of his key chapters was talking about nutrition. And when I read through it, he's actually got some calculations in there, give you like a pretty good estimate of your energy output, which can help you calculate how many carbohydrates you might need to replace in your system. And so I use them, put them into an Excel spreadsheet based off my body weight and the mileage I was putting in for each session for each one of the disciplines. And so, some of as I was putting them in, I use like my base. So I tracked my calories to get like a base level of carbohydrate that I would exist off, just like if I was doing like no work, just for me to exist. So for me, that worked out to be roughly about 450 grams of carbohydrates per day, which is still quite high in the grand scheme of things if you're talking just in general population levels.
So that was your basal metabolic rate for carbohydrates?
Yes, 450 grams. So I took that, and then whatever I was doing exercise-wise from an aerobic standpoint, whatever I burned from that, I would basically replace with carbohydrates and some fats as well, depending on, just the volume of food and whether or not I could eat it. So once I started pushing you know, 3 hour bike rides and we're hitting 80+ kilometer sessions, you know, I'm pushing up towards 1,000 grams of carbohydrates per day, which like you think about it and you're like, gee, that's a lot of food. But when you're eating it, it is a lot of food. And like you don't realize, because like, you know, a gram of carbohydrates is 4 calories, whereas a gram
Yeah.
of fat is 9. And so the volume of carbohydrates to replace that energy with is like extremely high. But at the same
Brilliant.
time, as we were saying earlier, I didn't gain or lose really any weight at all. So um, I pretty much stayed constant. So obviously, what I was doing was maintaining my energy um, requirements. So I think the the biggest thing, like initially, I was quite scared almost to eat that much food, because I was like, gee, I'm gonna eat all this and just, you know, turn into a slob, and
Yeah.
like I'm gonna be doing all this exercise and I'm just gonna look like shit. Like, but I think, yeah, to be able to and to manipulate it the way I did, like I was very diligent in how I tracked it, and I wanted to make sure that I was on top of it and that I had my energy requirements met, because when you're training at that amount of volume, like you do need to be quite on top of it all. And if you're under eating, like I did a couple of times not hit what I wanted to hit. And it was only like I only let it be a couple of times. What, you know, like when you're in that following training session, you're like, man, I'm feeling pretty flat here. I need something. And like, so for me, it was mostly about being diligent and making sure. And if anything, I would probably try and overeat a little bit if I wasn't sure if I'd had enough, because I knew going into those next sessions I was going to need energy. And even like, as we were saying, aerobic work being quite not easy, but it's comfortable. Like it's still energy output that you're
Yeah. There's
doing.
still a demand for sure.
And when you're working at as much volume as I was, like you need the energy to sustain it. And if you don't have that energy available, you're going to feel it, even if it is just a pretty chilled session.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. Did you notice? I mean, obviously there wasn't significant body composition changes, but did you notice? I mean, I like this is the stuff I like to get nitty gritty on, but um, how was like your mood around it, and how were like stuff like bowel movements? Did you feel like, man, I'm going to the toilet 1,000 times a day, or did that not change significantly because of the way that your
Um,
body was utilizing the energy coming in? Did you feel like you were getting better quality sleep because you weren't being taxed and then going to sleep tired? You were going to sleep exercised and then you were recovering through sleep, or, like little things like that.
yeah. Bowel movement didn't really change at all. Like it was pretty similar. Like the
Mhm.
volume was maybe a little bit more, but I
Sure.
didn't go any more frequently. I didn't feel bloated. I didn't feel, and like I did make sure like I was, from a fiber standpoint, I wasn't eating too much, because when you have a high carbohydrate diet that is not just simple carbohydrates, it's quite easy to eat a lot of fiber.
100%.
Um, so I was actually quite diligent in that as well, that I wasn't eating like a hell of a lot of fiber, because then that would have been terrible.
Block you up.
I would have, like, you would have just felt horrendous, and you would have like looked like, you know, yeah, 7 months pregnant the whole time.
Distended. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, so from a bow point of view, nothing really changed. So I think what I was eating was definitely getting utilized. I definitely think my muscle glycogen and liver glycogen ability to store the carbohydrates grew,
Yep.
because it seemed like as I ate more into like the training, I I was able to just like eat it, and it was like it would just get stored and it was fine. And you know, body weight, as I said, wasn't changing, but I was eating more and more as my training volume went up and up. So the requirement was there, and my ability to store and utilize it just improved.
So early
Um,
days, obviously satiety levels were the thing that were holding you back from, getting the volume in. Um, but did that change as well over the period where your body just went, okay, this is the volume now and it's easier to eat? Or was it always a
yeah.
struggle to get those calories in?
No, for me, it got to the point where I would eat a meal and then I was hungry straight away again,
Really?
especially on like,
Not a good feeling.
especially on big days or days where I would program like 2 aerobic sessions in. Like I would eat and then I would want to eat again straight away. I was like, it was crazy. And like, if I'm hitting like 700, 800, 900 plus grams of carbohydrates, like that is a lot of volume. And it was quite bizarre to see it. You know, I've eaten a meal. This meal I've just had was 300 grams of carbs plus, 30, 40 grams of protein plus 20 grams of fat. And I've eaten it and it's, 45 to an hour later and I'm hungry again. Like that was almost quite bizarre to me.
Yeah.
But like the other thing being a sweet sleep quality, like you asked, sleep's not something I've always struggled a lot with. I think I've always been a good sleeper and I always find myself not struggling to fall asleep. If anything, it's like I'll wake up during the night, but I didn't notice anything major change in that regard either. I think I go through like ebbs and flows where I'll have a good period where I'll sleep the entire night unbroken. And then there'll be another period of time where it's like, you wake up 2 or 3 times during the night. Sometimes it can be struggle to go back to sleep. And like you just do that for a period of time and it's sort of not, I don't really think it's anything major. It's just sort of the way I operate. But I notice it around, I think the biggest thing for me is I'm not really someone who gets stressed a lot, but the only thing that really gets to me is when I'm doing uni exams. Because for me, like in my head, that's like almost a make or break situation.
Yeah,
because
that's where the stress kind of catalyzes.
Yeah, where like with the current degree I'm studying, like if you fail that unit, you got to wait a whole year to repeat it. Like it's not like you can just go and do it again next semester. So for me, like there's a lot riding on it because it's an extra year out of my life where I have to just wait to have another crack at this thing.
Yeah,
so
at a 10-week unit.
Yeah, so I found my sleep quality probably went down around exam time, but I also did make sure I changed my training around a little bit to reflect that because I knew that if I kept training up here whilst my study stress started rising, like that cup was going to overflow quite quickly.
Yeah.
So I definitely accounted for that. And I think I was able to keep my sleep at a pretty reasonable state during that period.
For sure. I mean, that's a strong benefit of having that auto-regulative ability as a coach, and as an athlete where, I mean, in the next few weeks, I'm going to be interviewing one of my college basketballers, Sasha, and we spent, I think, 16 to 18 weeks where she was back in Australia with her family. We spent 18 weeks auto-regulating. It was a little bit more work on my end, but it was very beneficial for her because there are a lot of modifiable variables that go into being a collegiate athlete with such a high ceiling for training. And, she'll tell everyone more about that in those few weeks, but the ability to pivot on the fly based on how you're feeling within or without a session is paramount to being able to control all the other variables that go around training. Like training can be the thing that we get laser focused on, but we end up sacrificing a lot for in the long run. And we have to understand that there's got to be some symbiosis between training and not training. Not training isn't just recovery, it's doing other things. Like training and recovery are kind of one package, and then you've got all the other stuff that happens around that. And just because, you're not in a session doesn't mean that you have to dedicate that time to training recovery. You can still be recovering, but while also doing university work, where you're purposefully doing or driving towards something better or different. But your shift isn't on training, you're not dedicating all that time to training because you can get a little consumed by that. It is a big hole, like a very big hole. And as you say, you were pushing 7 to 8 hours of aerobic time a week. And I guess that's like a mix between the pool, the bike, and running. And as you said, you know, like when we were having a chat about doing this episode, like there are those times where you don't consider the travel time as well to the pool, for example, where you're driving to the pool in the morning. Like that's part of training. You might not be training, but it's time dedicated to training that you have to consider and factor in, which means it's potentially less sleep in the morning. So you may have to get some, like an extra hour the night before in order to be able to perform that, which means that whole day before you need to be reflecting your intention to get up the next day to go to the pool in that whole day before. And that's a follow-on effect to every single day within a training cycle, where training shouldn't be your number one focus unless you're a full-time athlete. But even then you need to find other things to help part your time out so that it's not just training, recovery.
Yeah.
Then you
100%.
fall into that hole. So it's, you know, it's great that you're able to utilize that auto-regulative tool where you sit there and go, training ceiling is here, but I'm also getting stressed out of my brain because of uni. So I need to start backing off one of these two things. And you know, you're able to make that decision and that sacrifice in the moment. Very powerful.
Yeah. And yeah, like, as you were saying, from an elite athlete standpoint, if that's all you're focusing on, and I know I can become quite like tunnel visioned when I'm doing all this sort of stuff, and it can become a mental grind very quickly if that's all you're allowing yourself to be consumed by.
Yeah.
Because like it's all you do, it's all you think about, and it's all you're prepping for. So yeah, it can become a mental grind very quickly. And I did I probably suffered that a little bit, but I was able to pull myself out of it because in the past it has hit me quite hard with a lot of things that I've done. Just because that's my personality. It's very like laser focused, so to speak. So, but I guess again, that's another hole we can go down another time.
Absolutely.
Mental aspect.
For sure, man. For sure. Hey, we've been talking for like over an hour and a half, I think, which is awesome. I'm not sad about it. I love it. But in the interest of keeping this digestible, let's put a pause on this conversation and then we can pick this up another time, man, because I friggin' love chatting to you about this stuff.
Absolutely.
And it is, I don't know, it's just so interesting and fascinating from an outsider's perspective. Like this was the kind of content that I was begging for when I was like a new coach and a new clinician. This is the conversation that I wish I had been privy to, because these were the conversations that I had to go and like kick doors in to be a part of. And even then I felt like more than just a fly on the wall, and I felt like an intruder. So I loved that we were able to have some of the sort of, you know, the depth of conversations we have and, you know, put that in a more public forum. I'm really excited to share this around and hopefully get some cool chatter around it. I think that'd be rad.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate what you're doing, man, for the industry. It's great. And I'm happy to help contribute. It's again, like the more we can put out there and help other people, then I think, and get them to think, I think it's the more beneficial it's going to be. And even what we went through today, it was probably, I reckon we might have touched on about half of what I wrote down as well.
Yeah,
so
half the talking points for sure. Yeah. There's so much to it. It's such a deep rabbit hole, man. And like, you know, we've said this before, like how do you talk about all of this in one sitting? Like it's impossible. You've got to go away and contemplate and then come back and ask questions. And when you've asked those questions and gotten some more context, maybe when we start talking about it again, you'll actually pick up more because you've got a foundation to base all the new information off. That's what I love about learning is don't give it to me all in one hit. You know, tell me something cool. Let me go away and think about it. Let me play with it. Let me come back, ask you questions. Let's keep talking about it because I think I'm getting ready to understand a bit more. And that's, you know, that's why I resonate with you as a peer and a colleague, because we learn the same way. Like we're both very sort of kinesthetic learners, but we do that in a way to make the thing that we've just theoretically learned practically applicable. And then we go back to the theory and go, yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, of course it makes sense. Whereas people sit there going, how do you learn so quick? Like, well, it's not quick. It's just practical. You learn the principles and you apply it. Really practical.
Yeah. 100%.
Love it, man. Absolutely froth it. Hey, where can people find you on social media? Throw your little handles out.
Oh man,
Plug yourself.
So Instagram for my coaching page is at coach_James W. I have been a little lackluster on the posting at the moment, but once uni has ceased, me and a colleague of mine have got a little bit of stuff in the works. So we'll try and keep you all posted on that.
That's
We're going
exciting.
to hopefully build upon over the coming months and years. So
Hell yeah.
we'll see how that goes. And then Facebook, just type in James Westhorpe if you want to add me as a friend. I'm always willing to talk shop to people about stuff because I love talking about stuff and learning. Learning is probably a passion. I don't use Twitter much, but I have one. But don't bother following me on there or whatever you do these days on there because I haven't been on it in about 4 years. So I'd say Instagram and Facebook's probably the best way.
You've missed a lot on Twitter, man. I don't know if you know this, but Donald Trump is the president. And there are a lot of people that believe that the earth is flat, and they use Twitter as a platform to tell you exactly how they feel about that and to decry anyone that throws a bit of science their way. So it's the Badlands on Twitter. I'm so happy I don't have a Twitter. It's one of the best things I've ever done. Best things I've ever done. I could just imagine me just using it as a platform to like make fun of people in a way that they don't know I'm making fun of them, because I already do that on Facebook. I don't need another vessel for that, and Instagram as well. I do like to poke fun. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having this chat. I really appreciate it, for dedicating some of your time to me. It was awesome. It was a really, really cool talk.
I loved it. More than happy to be a part of it. It was great.
Sure. I really loved our little chat at the start. So I'm definitely going to edit that out and or edit it up and put it out as a separate video, because I think that's really cool to talk about. Duty care.
I think that was
dignity.
Yeah. I think that's some good value in there for sure.
For sure. I'm glad I hit record, because normally I just talk and then I go, freaking hell, I wish I'd recorded that. So this time, like in my head, before we even started, I was like, I always have mad chats with James. Before we even start, I need to be diligent, because as soon as we start talking, we're going to talk about something really cool. And I just need to be disciplined and say, stop, let me record. Go. Let's talk. Like, don't feel bad about it. Just cut him off.
You almost just need to start recording. You almost need to just start recording from the top. So
and then edit what I need to. I agree. Maybe I should
take what you need. You know,
for sure. All right, man. We're gonna hit it there. Thank you guys so much for giving this a watch. If you've got any questions, please shoot them down below in the comment section, or you can give me a direct message or a follow. Happy to answer questions similar to James. Just love talking shop. So if you want to get it, then we can get it. Until next time, thanks very much for dropping by, and see you then.